So the first thing I want to start with is just a brief overview of these kind of levels of the human psyche that we're working with. So this is Freud's view of the human mind. It's his view of what they call the iceberg model. It's an old model that still applies today, although Jung has also modified this, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So up here at the tip of the iceberg, we have, these are my correlations, 3 levels of consciousness: daytime, twilight, and nighttime consciousness. So daytime consciousness we're fairly familiar with. Daytime consciousness is, you know, think of it like when the sun is out. And when the sun is out, everything is bright and it's illuminated and things make sense and you can navigate and you can see things and name things and see lots of colors, and your conscious mind is more present because it's engaged, and its job in daytime consciousness and during the daytime is to help you navigate the world. You communicate, you talk with others, you read maps, you read books, you do all kinds of things with your conscious mind. But as we know, the conscious mind is only 10 to 20% of our whole, and if we say brain, but I don't even want to say brain because consciousness isn't necessarily contained in the brain. It's the whole human psyche. It's only 10 to 20% of it. And unfortunately, that is mostly where we are all the time. And not just individually, but collectively as a society. So as a society, we've become hyper rational, which is a longer discussion I won't get into, you know, since the age of enlightenment, et cetera, and Descartes and all of that, where we've become hyper-focused on this, on the rational mind, and have kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater of these other parts of our consciousness. And in astrology, what I see sometimes, when we're using only our conscious mind with the chart, either understanding the chart or reading, either understanding it for ourselves or reading it for somebody else, and we're applying 10 to 20% this conscious mind that's making correlations, it's looking at symbols, it's drawing from what you've learned in the past and bringing it into even synthesizing, although synthesizing is a little bit of a function of higher mind, which blends a little bit of the unconscious. But mostly we're in that 10 to 20% range. And the archetypes, interestingly, don't live here. The archetypes live here. So we're up here trying to understand what's going on there. And in other words, kind of squeezing the archetypes through this tiny little needle, right? Like the camel through the needle. And what I'm introducing is, or what I'm hoping to introduce today is to just give you an access point in how does one approach this? How does one approach the subconscious, the unconscious level? So daytime consciousness, you understand that. Now in between here, Freud talked about this space between the conscious and the subconscious mind, which he called the preconscious. And some might call this the pre-subconscious level as well. In the preconscious mind, it's a space that is not wholly of the conscious and not wholly of the subconscious. It's like a membrane between the two. So some memories are stored there. Think of it like a browser cache, because that is very much what the preconscious is like. It's like a browser cache that stores the recently visited pages that you've seen that you can easily recall to the conscious, right? But we also know, for example, if you, using the same analogy, if you visited one of those, you know, tabs, let's say your browser cache, you could easily go down the rabbit hole following clicks on that, which would then lead you into deeper, away from that content, and in my analogy, deeper into the subconscious, right? Like we say, falling down the Google rabbit hole. You can easily do that. So the preconscious mind then relates to both of these. Now, astrologically, what's interesting is that we would think of quite frequently when we think of Mercury as the ruler of the conscious mind, we also kind of confine Mercury to this kind of consciousness. But in mythology, and he's the god of the liminal. And liminal means that space between the worlds, right? And as we know, Mercury can go down. Mercury is the one who went into Hades to get Persephone and bring her back up. And Mercury is known, and Mercury as an archetype, as we understand it, planetary wise, is known for being able to permeate boundaries, right? To move between boundaries. It's that mutable energy of Mercury. So this twilight consciousness, which is not wholly focused in the conscious, yet still allows these memories, like I said, this stored knowledge might be, if I say to you as an example, besides the browser, if I say to you, remember the childhood home you grew up in. You don't have to penetrate that deep into the subconscious to get there. You could call up an image. That would be an example of something that's stored in the preconscious mind. Now, to get into the subconscious mind, and Mercury would be your guide there, right? Because Mercury can go either way, into the wholly confined within the conscious, or penetrate into the subconscious. So, for example, if we wanted to go into your subconscious, one of the ways to go there is to engage what's called the irrational, right? So the subconscious mind is associated with nighttime. And think about it again in the terms of daylight, twilight, and nighttime. Twilight consciousness, what I call twilight consciousness, is, think of sunset and dusk or dawn, where the light is diffuse, right? Where forms and shadows can play tricks on the mind, and you're not quite sure what you see. And there's that feeling of it's not quite day, it's not quite night. And things are not a little blurry, it's a little Neptunian, but very much in this liminal space, the liminal space between the broad daylight and the dark of night. Nighttime consciousness, as we know, and nighttime or subconscious is all in the dark. And that's when we dream. So think about it. Twilight might be that space. Another analogy would be that space where you're just starting to fall asleep. And when you're starting to fall asleep, content of your subconscious is already arising, and your conscious mind may be there to be able to capture and remember what's arising, but your focus is a bit blurry. The conscious mind is blurred more and allows more of this content to come up. That's how we access the subconscious. We use this power of twilight consciousness and the power of Mercury to transcend and descend into both of these worlds.